First item on our agenda is a COVID-19 town update from town administration and from the health department.
Sure, so I'll kind of kick things off. Focus this week has been registrations for the COVID vaccine. Melissa, I know, has a lot to update the board on. So I'll turn it right over to Melissa.
Perfect. Thanks, Patrick. So I did make the board aware of it, but we did excitingly kick off the registration for the upcoming COVID clinics. So the clinics are being held on Tuesdays and Thursdays at the COA. There's 2 time slots for each day. Right now, and we will continue, we're sticking with the phased rollout that the state is doing right now. So those that are eligible to receive the vaccine are those in phase 1, as well as those individuals 75 years and older. Tuesday has been tailored to accommodate those in phase 1 as well as those 75 years and older, and that includes Walpole residents as well as Walpole employees. The Thursday clinic has been closed off to only those 75 and older, and again, Walpole residents. We feel that it's a good thing to have kind of a separate clinic for that population, so then they feel more comfortable to come in, and it's again tailored towards that age group. So the links did go live yesterday. Unfortunately, due to the lack of vaccine allocation on the local level, we were only able to open 50 slots per clinic. So it's a total of 200 for the week. So 100 on Tuesdays and 100 on Thursdays. So as you can imagine, the slots filled up rather quickly. I think it was within an hour we were filled to capacity, and then a wait list had began. So we are encouraging residents to continue to sign up. They will be put on a wait list, and each week we will open up new clinics dependent on how much vaccine we have, and those individuals on the wait list will obviously get first priority into a slot. Another thing that we definitely want to encourage with our residents is there are other places that individuals can get vaccinated, Gillette being one of them. So even if you're on one of our wait lists, it's always great to be proactive. Go on the state website, search in your area, potentially where you can go to get the vaccine and sign up. Definitely a great thing. Another thing that we want to really reiterate is even with the vaccine, we still encourage residents to be vigilant with social distancing, with wearing the mask. So getting the vaccine does not end all of that. Lastly, we don't want residents to get discouraged. We understand that, right now there's only so much vaccine out there. We will keep plugging along. We'll be holding the clinics every Tuesday and Thursday for quite some time to come. If we get more vaccine, we'll definitely open up to an additional day or potentially lengthen the clinics that we have now. Information for the clinics is on our town website, and also the links for the upcoming clinics the week after are up on the website as well. So people have access to those. A huge kudos to the COA. They've been huge in helping seniors sign up. As you know, the 75 plus population might not necessarily have access to a computer or an email address. So it makes it very difficult that is the way individuals have to sign up. So our COA director has, enlisted the help of her staff and has been really with the process of signing individuals on, as well as our department as well. So we'll continue to do that. We'll work through those on the wait list. We'll get more individuals interested, but again, we can't stress enough the importance of still looking elsewhere to get the vaccine. I've heard positive things about Gillette. I know certain times are good to go on and see when the spots become available, but that's I think is helpful as well. Another resource, Big Y just recently started doing clinics. They're not doing a large amount at a time, but I have heard a few people calling ahead and being able to receive the vaccine. Mona, I know you're with CVS. Has CVS started to do any public clinics or private or walk-ins?
So far, we're still in phase, include the nursing homes and employees. They're having all employees vaccinated. That's all what I've heard so far, but they're definitely planning once they roll out phase 2. And we are actually, I'm sorry, it's the 75 and older is phase 2 tier 1, right? So yes, starting February 1st, CVS is going to start doing that.
Great.
Considering we have available vaccines.
Sure.
And also they notified us too, like in case that we don't have enough vaccinations, you know, the possibility of canceling certain clinics, but they will notify all patients. But so far we haven't heard any cancellations. So, which means that, you know, we have, you know, enough vaccines right now. And the brand that we're using, we started with Pfizer, then we ran out. Then now we're doing Moderna. So
Perfect. Good.
just down, right? So yeah, so they can, you know, any town residents, they're more than welcome to just go to cvs.com and sign up for if they're eligible for the COVID-19 vaccinations. Sure.
Perfect. And those others that have been inquiring, say 65 plus or 2 comorbidities, we will be following, our clinics will mirror the state rollout. So like you referenced, phase 1 has been approved, and then phase 2 tier 1, those 75 and older, has also been approved. So as soon as the next phase rolls out, those individuals would be eligible to attend our clinics. And we'll make that information available on our website as well.
Melissa, can I add just a couple things?
Yeah, of course.
So you mentioned earlier the Council on Aging. So just for the viewing public, the Council on Aging has been inundated with phone calls the last couple days or so. So for people watching at home, they're working on getting back to everybody. The thing that's been happening is that multiple people have been calling multiple times. So they're in the process of responding back to everybody, but everybody will get a phone call. In the meantime, we've had the rec department's going to be helping out the Council on Aging, sorting through the messages that have been coming in and relaying those to the proper people at the Council on Aging. In addition to that, Melissa, you also mentioned the vaccine website on the town's website. So that's walpole-ma/COVID shots. So we're in the process of working with the health department, the Council on Aging. We're going to put together some frequently asked questions. So if there's folks that don't necessarily need to talk to, you know, a person, we can direct them to the town website for information about, you know, the local vaccination process. So that's it for me.
I have a question for Melissa, like for the clinic. You said that the clinics will be open to non-resident as well, but then we given priority to our residents.
So what it is the Tuesday clinics are open to Walpole residents as well as Walpole employees. And then the Thursday clinic is only open to Walpole residents 75 and older. Potentially this might change in the future depending on how much vaccine we've been allocated. But right now, since it's such a small amount, we want to make sure that, you know, we're reaching our residents and also those that are employed in Walpole.
Makes sense.
Yep. Anything else from the town, Patrick?
No, just you know, just as far as kind of overall operations, Jim had submitted his budget message. It actually just went on the website, town's website today. So the finance committee is going to be getting together starting Monday of next week to undertake the spring town meeting process. So keep a lookout for that. Other than that, just taking it day by day.
All right. Well, thank you so much for the update, Patrick.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great meeting.
Take care. All right. Next on our agenda is approval of the minutes from the January 19th meeting. Are there any changes, corrections, additions, or deletions to the minutes as they have been submitted?
I don't have anything. I didn't find anything, but I had a question about the first motion set for 770 Washington Street in Walpole, where it says that they're giving them the option of connecting with town sewer. Are there any charges to hook up to the town sewer?
There are fees that are associated with hooking up to town sewer.
Do you know approximately, like, is it more economical to sign up with it?
So it's all dependent on how far away sewer is to the home, and do you know what I mean, their frontage and all of that. So that's something they would have to discuss separately with the engineering department to determine that.
I was wondering if it was more economical to just hook up with the town rather than just having their own septic system and less responsibility.
Okay.
So I'll make a motion, I guess, if no one has.
Please do.
I'll make a motion in regards to the January 19th, 2021 minutes. The Board of Health approves the minutes as is.
I'll second that.
Motion has been made and seconded. Is there any further discussion? We'll poll the members then. I will vote aye to approve. Carol?
Aye.
Mona?
Aye.
Richard?
Aye.
4-0-0 for the minutes. Next on our agenda is an animal permit at 32 Irving Drive for 6 chickens. I did see that the animal inspector does not have any issues with that. Have the abutters been notified?
The abutters have been notified, correct.
Is there anyone here tonight to speak either for or against that animal permit?
Not that I'm aware of.
I'm not hearing anybody.
I'm here as the homeowner.
Oh, okay. Then we
Just
would
listening.
assume you would speak in favor of getting the permit.
In favor, correct.
Any issues, Melissa or Reiki, on the permit? I mean, John
No.
took a look at it and everything looked fine.
No, we have no concerns with this animal permit being issued.
Okay. Anyone?
And just one comment about the plan for manure management. It was an excellent detailed plan. So thank you for using the compost. That was definitely something that brought my attention.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Who would like to make a motion then on that animal permit?
I'll make a motion regarding the animal permit on Irving Drive that the Board of Health has no concerns and is happy that this gentleman is going forth with chickens.
All right. Do I hear a second?
Well, second.
Motion has been made and seconded. Is there any further discussion? All right. Hearing none, we'll poll the members. I will vote aye to approve. Carol?
Aye.
Mona?
Aye.
Richard?
Aye.
4-0-0 approving the permit. Good luck with that, sir.
All right. Thank you very much, guys. Have a good night.
You as well.
Thanks.
Next on our schedule is a septic variance for 31 Chandler Drive.
Yes, and the homeowner, I believe, is also on the call in case you have any questions. But he is requesting a variance. So the Title V requires a 10-foot setback for a slab foundation to the system. And currently they're meeting that 10-foot, but they're hoping to put a small addition on the back so that they would be only 5 feet from the system.
And the drawings that I saw were not the official engineered drawings that we normally would see. Are those being done up by somebody?
I did submit them. I do apologize to the board. I got a request on Tuesday to submit something for this meeting. Unfortunately, my engineer had drawn up the plans and sent them to me. I got them on Thursday. I did forward them along to the town. I'm not sure if it made it to the board or not.
So I believe Melissa sent that email out, I think, yesterday with those plans, the updated engineering plans.
Oh, okay. I just saw that it was an attachment. I assumed it was what she had sent out the week before.
No, so those were the updated plans,
Oh, okay.
just to get a clearer picture of where the addition is going to be. And so you'll see that they're going to be putting posts right outside the 5-foot dig out so that they're not going to be encroaching on the 5-foot dig out. And then they'll have a slight overhang over that 5 foot, but they won't be over the system or over the tank or pump chamber or D box.
Okay. Do we need to have anything flagged during the construction of the addition?
So yes, the system components should be flagged just so that as they're putting on the addition, they know where those components are so that they're not driven over. And then if the number of rooms, total rooms, will exceed 7 now, because it is designed for a 3-bedroom, a deed recording would be required to say that it is a 3-bedroom.
Okay. And do we know what?
I would like to just say to the board that the house is deeded as a 3-bedroom currently. That is registered that way.
Oh, okay, so you're not increasing the number of bedrooms?
No, I'm not. This is, the house was built as a slab, strictly a slab with no rear entry. So this is kind of adds a rear entry platform to come off the back of the house. So instead of just walking into our kitchen, we're trying to have a transition room to come into the back of the house. I would like to say, I have to add that if you look at the new set of plans, it's slightly varied from the first submission. The reason for that was the structural engineer had a second look at the way we were canopying. Because of the non-permeable soil in this district, I have a high slope off the back of the house. They didn't feel that structurally the canopy was a good methodology of building. So we'll have to build it right to the actual piers rather than do the canopy that we originally. But that should be reflected in the second set. And I do apologize to the board. It was just a timing issue of me getting the stuff submitted quickly enough, and I wanted to have something for you to look at, so I gave you what I had at that time Tuesday.
Okay. Any concerns with the plans as they're submitted in terms of the proposed project? Looks pretty straightforward.
And just that they don't dig within that 5-foot dig out or within the system itself, that they stay outside that, which is what they're proposing to do.
All right. Who would like to make a motion on that one? Nobody?
I can make a motion regarding 31 Chandler Avenue. For all the takers, I might as well jump in. The Board of Health has no objection to the variance that's being requested, with the caveat that they do not dig within the proposed area to get closer than was it the 5 feet to the system.
Okay.
I'll second it.
Motion has been made and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none. Oh, wait a minute.
The system to be flagged, or that's automatic?
Maybe I could add to it for the board. We did have a bunch of meetings, kind of off the shoulder down at Town Hall. We tried to take due diligence here to make sure we didn't get into any of these zones that we shouldn't build over. Quite frankly, obviously, I wouldn't want to build over anything either. I need to, if something was to go wrong, I need to get to any of these functional parts of my septic system. So that was, we've taken the time to try to build this properly and not infringe into that zone. I would just, caution, make sure we look at the second set of what I submitted rather than the first.
Right. Oh, no. But I think, Mona, your point is a good one, that we probably should modify the motion to include that the system be flagged during any construction to make sure that nothing, or that whoever's doing the work knows exactly where the system components are during the construction. Is that okay with you, Richard?
Absolutely.
Okay. So motion has been made and seconded. We're modifying it slightly. Do I hear a second to the modified motion?
Second.
Motion's made and seconded. Is there any further discussion? All right, hearing none, we'll poll the members. I will vote aye to approve. Carol?
Aye.
Mona?
Aye.
Richard?
Aye.
4-0-0. Good luck with your construction project, sir.
I appreciate the board hearing me today. Thank you.
All right. Looks like we have about 1 minute before our scheduled 7:50 time. Is there anything, Melissa, that is not on the agenda that we need to be aware of?
No, not at this time. Just to thank you to those who are volunteering at our clinics coming up, and for those that are interested in volunteering, we do have a Sign Up Genius link going around. So anyone that's interested in helping, it doesn't have to just be medical, it can be non-medical as well. We definitely can find a spot for you to help.
Okay. All right, now I do see now that the hour is 7:50. We do have a scheduled public hearing at that hour. I will poll the members to open the public hearing. Carol?
I vote yes, please.
Mona?
Yeah, aye, yes.
Richard?
Aye.
And I'll vote aye. The public hearing is now open on the matter of the Home for Little Wanderers. They're appealing our December 22nd, 2020 cease and desist order. Would ask Attorney Corbo if he would be kind enough to open up the meeting with an opening statement for us.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, to members of the board, those in attendance and members of the public. Good evening. My name is Greg Corbo, Town Council for the Town of Walpole, and I'm here this evening to assist the board in rendering a decision with respect to an appeal of its December 22nd, 2020 cease and desist order, which was issued to the Home for Little Wanderers in the Town of Walpole. By way of background, the Board of Health of the Town of Walpole has the statutory authority to investigate and issue orders to prevent nuisances and sources of sickness within its town. With respect to that authority, on December 22nd, 2020, the board issued a cease and desist order to Home for Little Wanderers. The order was based on evidence that the home had repeatedly violated applicable laws with respect to the placement of underage residents within its facilities in the Town of Walpole, and had specifically prevented children from running away from the facility and inflicting harm upon themselves, and the operators of the home had failed to prevent the spread of COVID-19 both within the facilities and within the community. In issuing the order, the board gave the home an opportunity to request a public hearing. According to the terms of the order, the request had to be in writing and received by the board within 7 days. Although the home did not make a timely request for hearing, it did make such a request after the deadline passed. And although not obligated to consider a late filed request, the board is going to give the home an opportunity to be heard in any event. And that's the purpose of this proceeding. The purpose of the proceeding is to give the Home for Little Wanderers to present evidence and argument to the board as to why the order should not remain in place. I will also note that the order specifically required that it be complied with in order for an appeal to be perfected, and that obligation has not been met either. However, on the advice of counsel, and in an effort to, in good faith, resolve this matter, it was my recommendation that the board go forward with the hearing. And to that effect, the proceeding will proceed in 4 phases. In the first phase, the Home for Little Wanderers will have an opportunity to present argument and evidence through its representatives as to why the order should not remain in place. In the second part of the proceeding, the town, through its police department and Board of Health representatives, will have an opportunity to present evidence on behalf of the town. In the third part, members of the public who are here and interested will have an opportunity to speak at the discretion of the chair. And then finally, the board will close the evidentiary portion of the hearing and proceed with its deliberations and decision. During its deliberations phase, the board will vote on one of 3 questions: whether the order should remain in place, whether the order should be vacated, or whether the order should be modified in some way. So before we begin, to members of the board, are there any questions regarding procedure?
I think you've outlined it very well, and I know that you did state it, but I do want to make sure that the record clearly shows that we are allowing this appeal to go forward, even though the Home for Little Wanderers failed to meet the required response window for such an appeal. But we do want to be as cooperative as we can within the scope of our responsibility for protecting the health and safety of the residents of the town of Walpole. So I want to make sure that the record clearly reflects the fact that this appeal hearing is going forward, even though there's no statutory requirement that we do so at this time because of the failure of the Home for Little Wanderers to respond timely.
Thank you. Yes, and through you, Mr. Chair, before we turn things over to the Home for Little Wanderers, I see that their counsel, Attorney Ash, is here. However, I do not see the president and CEO, Ms. Leslie Suggs. Is she on the line?
No, she is not.
Okay.
Joining me today,
Mr. Chair, that the president to whom the order was directed has chosen not to appear for this hearing.
So noted. Thank you.
And with that, Mr. Chair, just by way of ground rules, I suggest that all speakers wait to be recognized by the chair and only speak when so recognized, and that anybody who does wish to speak will identify themselves by name and address or affiliation, and they will follow the direction of the chair and not interrupt any other speakers.
So noted. I would also add to that, as we've done in the past, particularly when we get to phase 3, for comments from the public, if indeed there are going to be any. We do take input from the public very seriously. We do want to hear what you have to say. However, it is not a question of quantity of comments, but more the quality of the comments. So if someone has made a point that you want to make, it doesn't necessarily carry any more weight for that particular comment if we hear it 2 or 5 or 10 times. So in the interest of having as an efficient and use of time in the meeting, if someone has made a point that you wanted to make, I'll be more than happy to recognize you, but I would respectfully ask that you simply kind of keep your remark very brief to say that you support the comment made by a previous participant in the meeting. So at this point, we'll recognize Attorney Ash and allow you to present your reason for the appeal and why you think the board should take some action tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the members of the board for having us this evening. And to Attorney Corbo, thank you for your summary of what's happened to date, or over the last couple of weeks at least. I just want to comment first, you know, the home actually, you know, respectfully, it's my understanding that we did respond timely, and that's something that we can disagree about, but you know, we did feel we responded in a timely fashion. I'd also note that this order was dated on December 22nd, a few days before the holidays, and that you were right in that we are technically not in compliance and therefore not able to request this hearing, and namely in the sense that your order required us to remove every single one of our kids within 24 hours. And, you know, just impossible to do. But, you know, we do respect, you know, this board, and we do appreciate the opportunity to speak before you today. So thank you for having us. I have a few folks joining me from the Home for the Wanderers. Kathy O'Leary, she's a Vice President of Congregate Care. Rob Quinn, Rob, you forgive me, I don't have your title in front of me. And also Rebecca Reed. Rebecca Reed is the program director at the home in Walpole. She spends days, nights, weekends at the facility right there in Walpole. So we're here today to review the legality and the basis of the town's cease and desist order. And I want to state, you know, there were 5 reasons why we feel that this order should be vacated. First off, we feel that there's no legal or factual basis to affirm the cease and desist order at this time. And the Home for Little Wanderers is licensed by EDC, which is the Department of Early Education and Care. That is what allows them to operate this residential care facility. And all of its licenses are in good order at this time with respect to their child care facilities. Second, there's no evidence that the conditions at the Home for the Wanderers present a public nuisance or any cause of sickness within the town of Walpole. Third, there's no public health basis for the cease and desist order. Rather, it serves an ulterior purpose of advancing the town's goal to suspend our operations because of its perceived strain that the home has on the police department. Fourth, I'd say that the cease and desist order is inconsistent with state law, which exclusively vests the power to revoke and to modify and to suspend licenses in the Department of Early Education and Care. And therefore, your order is invalid under the doctrine of preemption. Fifth, I'd state that the cease and desist order is discriminatory and that it violates the law, particularly the Dover Amendment, which expressly protects child care facilities and prohibits a municipality from using health and safety laws to discriminate against persons with disabilities who reside in group living settings. Now, I'd like to give a little bit of background. I believe you all may know this, but the Home for the Waters is licensed by EDC for its residential facilities. It's also licensed by the Department of Early and Secondary Education, Desist, for the schools that it operates, as well as a few other agencies, depending on the kids that they're serving at the particular location. They provide early intervention, counseling, residential treatment, and special education for children in need. They've been in this business for more than 200 years here in the Commonwealth, and I think they've been in Walpole since the 40s, so quite some time at that location. Specifically, we're here today, well, one of the things we're here today to talk about is Duggan House. Duggan House is across the street from the main campus, and the most recent license for Duggan House was for the operation of a COVID-19 emergency COVID-19 group residence. And this was provided for in the governor's order of March 10th of this year. And it authorized EEC to license these sort of facilities. And Duggan House was one of those facilities that was licensed very early. In order to obtain that license, the Home for the Wanderers went through a rigorous process of providing information to EEC, working with DPH to set up policies and procedures that ranged a whole bunch of different things. And they went through that process. They were issued a license and able to bring children in to the property. In April of this year, the board issued its cease and desist order regarding Duggan House, citing concerns of this board. And I've had the opportunity to watch the meeting that you held back in April. In that meeting, you were encouraged just to push the pause button on Duggan House because you had several questions about how the facility was going to be run, how many kids would be there, what were the sort of the cleaning procedures, the use of bathrooms, things of that sort. Would there even be PPE? I can assure you that all of these questions, all of these issues had been addressed prior to their getting their license through EDC. They had policies and procedures that started with, what happens when a staff person arrives? Where do they put their stuff? What PPE is available to them? What are the cleaning procedures for the bathrooms and the rooms? What does the exit at the end of the day look like? We worked with so just to put that there, but your cease and desist letter, it wasn't just about the Board of Health. Your cease and desist letter went into great length with concerns from several departments within the town. There were concerns of the fire department. There was questions about, do they have proper sprinklers? Do they have this and that, fire extinguishers? Now let's not forget, this is also a facility that's been open for many years for various residential group homes. So most of this information was with the town, just needed to be updated. And understandably, we needed to do that, so we did as quickly as we could. The building department had concerns. Admittedly, there was a furnace that had been installed in the prior wintertime, and unknown to the Home for the Wanderers and facilities folks at the Home for the Wanderers, a furnace was installed without a permit. It was done by a licensed contractor, licensed plumber, but issues within that organization, they failed to get the permit. We immediately took steps to remedy that. There were also some general concerns, and there were also lengthy concerns with the police department. The Home for the Wanderers took steps to answer any questions that this board had. We provided all of the information that was requested of us. We worked with the building department. We worked with the fire department and sent, through council, sending information to everybody. We made ourselves available to see if there was any questions about anything at all. We wanted to answer them for you. We worked closely with the Board of Health, indicating, there are lines of communication. We will provide whatever information you need in terms of who the clients are, what their testing dates were, what their positive dates were, determining when their quarantine periods were going to start and end. And we've continued to make ourselves available to the police department. Chief Carmichael, thank you for joining us. I know that the chief has worked with the Home for the Wanderers and has, ongoing discussions. I know there's 2 police liaisons that work with the Home for the Wanderers, and they're great resources. We then moved into the summertime. And then this past December, recently, 2 weeks ago now, you guys issued your order of December 22nd, in which not only are there the concerns of the Board of Health related to COVID, but there are several 14 incidents that are summarized by the police department. Excuse me. So that's sort of a summary. It gets us to where we are today. Getting to my 5 points, my 5 sort of arguments. The Home for the Wanderers, again, is licensed by EEC, and we are, and in your order, you indicate that we repeatedly violated statutes, regulations, orders, and guidance to prevent children from running away, inflicting harm upon themselves, and that we failed to prevent the spread of COVID-19 both within the facilities and within the Home for the Wanderers. Well, I can tell you that the Home for the Wanderers is in compliance with EEC and the regulations that we fall under. But I think pointedly, there seems to be a strong feeling that a lot of this happens as a result of kids that run away, and that we are failing to stop these kids from running away. I want to say this: under the guidelines that we're governed by, I'm going to read this verbatim so you have it. Physical restraint shall be considered an emergency procedure of last resort and shall be prohibited in residential programs, except when a resident's behavior poses a threat of imminent, serious physical harm to self or others. Now, it doesn't mean that the Home for Little Wanderers doesn't try to stop kids from leaving. It doesn't mean that we don't use restraints. Sometimes we do. We do use restraints on occasion, but it has to be under very limited circumstances. And we also go to great lengths to try to discourage these youth from running, whether that be through therapy and having these kids sort of invest in sort of this is a place that's safe. This is a home away from home. But the home is essentially just not allowed to restrain its child anytime they try to leave the facility or walk out of a building. There's a lot of considerations that go into the use of restraints. They've got to take a look at the ratio of staff to children. They've got to make sure that during a restraint that they stay within ratio. They have to make considerations to the size of the kid, the size of the staff member. Certain restraints require more than 1 staff. Certain require typically 2 and sometimes 3, depending on the type of restraint. They have to make sure that the restraint is going to go well. If they feel like a restraint is not going to go well, they're not going to initiate the restraint. But my point is, again, just to reiterate, restraint is not just something that we can do at the door when a child tries to walk outside. That's the case for the main campus, the home at Walpole, and it's also the case at Duggan House. My second point, there's no evidence that conditions at the home currently constitute a public nuisance or a cause of sickness within the town. You indicate in your letter that we failed to protect residents, staff, first responders, and the public from the spread of COVID. And while we acknowledge that COVID-19 is in the residences across the street on the main campus, I can report to you that that the Duggan House has essentially closed. We opened up a second program at Roxbury House, which is located in Boston. EEC issued that license recently, in the beginning of the month, and in partnership with them, in an effort to sort of calm things down within the town and to try to assuage the town, we decided to take them up on that offer, and we closed Duggan House and we opened the same COVID unit, but in Boston. So there is no current emergency COVID unit, residential unit at Duggan House, and that's been the case now for several weeks. I gave notice to the health director several weeks ago of that information. I'd also can tell you that there. Let me see where I'm at. Hold on, sorry. Lot to talk about. The kids that were at Duggan House, of course, they did have COVID, but again, they're no longer there. The spread of COVID within the facility across the street of the main campus, at the home in Walpole, it's unfortunate, but it's not through a lack of care by the folks at the home. Staff are required to wear masks, practice social distancing, and maintain a clean environment, and they follow all the guidelines regarding this. But you've got to remember that this isn't just a simple brick and mortar facility. This is actually the home to several children, okay? So, while they're in the community, while they're in school, while they're transporting in cars, everyone, whether they be teachers or staff, they're required to wear masks. We do our very best to keep them in masks. But when they return back to the program, back to the home, they're there in the afternoons. They're there with their roommates. They have roommates, some of them, many of them. They're there with the direct care workers that work with them day in and day out, and it is their home. And requiring them to wear masks 24 hours a day is not easy. We do encourage them to wear masks, and we may require them to wear masks when we take them off campus, but it's really hard to keep them in masks 24 hours a day, in their rooms, in their living rooms, in their dining hall, in their kitchen. So that's very difficult. So I think that needs to be considered. You allege that the majority, in your letter, you allege that the majority of the staff is unable to work at either facility, and that as a result, the children are left without sufficient supervision. This statement is just incorrect. There are strict guidelines that regulate the ratio of clients to staff. You need to have, for every number of clients, you need this many staff, right? And that ratio can change depending on several factors. The age of the children in a particular facility or a particular home, the time of day or night, the overnights, generally the ratio goes down. You don't need as many staff for a room full of sleeping children. The ratio can also change and be modified regarding specific children. If there is a plan in place where someone is required to have what's called a one-to-one, that's done in concert with DCF and EEC. Now, as for those, we have to take, effort. We have to make efforts to stay within ratio. We must stay within ratio. And if and when staff members are sick, whether it be with COVID or anything, vacation, for whatever reason they're out. Well, I wouldn't say vacation. They're out unexpectedly. We have backup relief staff that we use. That we have a pool of staff at the Home for Little Wanderers who are very familiar with Home for Little Wanderers policies and protocols, and we can pull from that pool of per diem staff members who can go to any location at any time. We also have staff available to us through DCF, Perkins, and Arbor. So we have several places where we can bring in additional staff. And during the recent outbreak that was following Thanksgiving, we did rely on those and reach into those pools, but at no time did we have insufficient staff ratios, so just wanted to call that out. And finally, your cease and desist letter goes on again to bring it up, the police incidences. It talks about there being 114 police responses between January 1st and October 31st, and it summarizes those 14 police department responses. And I have to tell you, the police responses, as listed in your letter, they're simply not based in fact or reality. The synopsis of incidents provided by the police is wrought with inaccuracies, duplications, and instances that have little or nothing to do with COVID. I'm not saying that the ones that are there that are accurate, they're troubling, and we appreciate all of the hard work the police do. We appreciate the risk that they put themselves at. But there are, like I said, it's just wrought with duplications and just things that are incorrect. The stories aren't correct that they're telling you. And I don't think it's mean-spirited, but they're just mistakes. There's several different buildings over there, and I don't know if they have the children confused with one another. But you know, to say that these are 14 instances that all have to do with COVID, you know, or that are even distinct from each other is incorrect. And I want to say this, I fully appreciate the frustration that the police department has with incidents that we have that require police involvement. But the reality is that the kids at the Home for the Wanderers, Chief Carmichael said it very well in December. Somebody said, you know, are there bad eggs? And he said, you know, I don't think of any of them as bad eggs. These are kids that come from difficult circumstances. I'm paraphrasing. They come from difficult circumstances, and they all need protection and to be kept safe. And I couldn't agree with that more. But the part that I think where we have a disconnect is that we're not able to stop them necessarily and every single time at the door. We can't lock them in, and we can't restrain them from leaving in every instance, and even probably in most instances, unless they meet that threshold, right, where there is an imminent risk of serious bodily harm to themselves or another. These are kids that are staying at our facility inside of our building, home. It is their home, and they have the access to our campus and going outside. And for every incident where we have a child that goes AWOL and leaves the campus without authorization, we have 20 times, 100 times where a kid goes outside and goes for a walk, just within our grounds. And on occasion, you know, again, these are adolescents that are reaching sort of young men and young women, and they may go for a walk off of our campus. These are public streets, and there are no sidewalks. They can't walk on the grass of a neighbor without upsetting the neighbor. So they've got to walk down the street, and they're allowed to do that. Now there are certain requirements that we have when when certain children, it depends on their particular plan. It may be because of the circumstances of who's going out. Are they going out with somebody together? That's not a good thing. There are instances where we can, you know, restrain certain kids, but there is instances where many where we can't. And when we can't, we may be required to call the police. And with certain children, we're required to call the police immediately. And the police have asked us to call a lot of times quickly, which is fair. But, you know, certain kids were required to call soon, some were not. In certain instances, we would call after 30 minutes or 45 minutes. And with certain ages and certain kids, DCF doesn't want us calling the police unless they're gone for 4 hours. So there's a real wide range of, you know, guidelines that suggest when we should or should not, or really how quickly we should call the police. And in each of those calls to the police, you know, their response is appreciated. And I understand that it may require several then follow-up calls from the department. And all I can say is that we appreciate the good police work that they do. The third point that I had was that there's no public basis or no public health basis for the cease and desist order. And essentially, again, its ulterior purpose is advancing the town's goal of suspending our operations because of the town's view that we are a strain on the police force. I say this to this board because this has been something that's been going on now for several years. And it's not just in this board. The board seems to be, and the letter that the board sent seems to be the tool that the town is using to try to, slow down our organization or stop our organization from operating completely. The town's contention that the home's only plan is to do nothing when it comes to this, it's just contrary to the facts. We worked very hard to keep the kids from running. That goes for the COVID unit when it was here. And it also goes for the main campus at the home of Walpole. Fourth, I talked about it being basically an argument of preemption. Preemption basically means, in this case, that the Home Flood Waters, there's federal law, there's state law, there's town and local bylaws and ordinances. In this case, the home's license is issued by EEC, and it's our contention that the local ordinance to close us down because of COVID-19 in matters where there are no longer any COVID patients, and in the matter where we feel that the town's ulterior purpose is to close it because of a police issue, that this is invalid because of preemption. And then my last point has to do with the Dover Amendment, in that the Dover Amendment protects facilities such as the home, which make use of land and structures for educational purposes, and the Home for the Wanderers is an educational institution. Furthermore, that the board is acting beyond its reach in issuing the cease and desist order, and that it serves to discriminate against the youth that the Home for the Wanderers serves, which includes disabled youngsters, and the Dover Amendment specifically protects against that, and that therefore this is a per se violation of the Dover Amendment, in that it's discriminatory in its nature. So that's my presentation. I think the one though that I want to sort of just go back to briefly is that, again, at this time, the Home Flood Wanderers has 0 COVID cases on its campus, either on the main campus or at Duggan. Duggan was closed, and I want to get back to Duggan for a second too. I don't know if I mentioned this. I think I may have skipped over it, but the contention that COVID spread amongst staff and clients at Duggan House, your letter says it happened at both. There was no COVID, as far as we know, there was no spread of COVID in Duggan House, there was no spread to staff who worked at Duggan House. So this is a standalone building meant for kids that come in there who already have COVID and are quarantined because of COVID. The staff that work in there worked really hard to stay safe and wear PPE and keep kids in their rooms to the extent they can. The EEC went to great lengths, and hopefully went to great lengths to try to encourage these kids to stay there, almost making it, not a resort at all, but trying really hard to really enticing these kids not to leave their rooms or the building. So through these efforts, we're not aware of a single COVID case that spread from Duggan House to any other staff or any other kids. Across the street at the main campus, in the weeks following Thanksgiving, there was a spike in COVID cases. But again, these are kids that, many of them, live at the Home for the Wanderers. DCF is their guardian, and so they spend the majority of their time at the Home for the Wanderers. But many of them do have family resources. It doesn't mean that they don't have parents or siblings that care for them, or aunts and uncles or grandparents that they can visit. And oftentimes they have home passes. And so, where these kids might have picked it up, or where our staff picked it up, it doesn't mean that our staff picked it up at the Home for the Wanderers. They might have picked it up at Thanksgiving and then come back. There's really no telling exactly where it came from, but we do know that it's spread within, we do believe it's spread within the walls at the Home for the Wanderers, given that sort of home setting that they have on the main side of the campus. We're not aware of any spread that actually, we're not aware of any COVID-19 that spread to the police, and we would be very upset if it happened, and it would be very unfortunate. We are aware that we admit, there are kids that when they run and they encounter police, they make threats, they make claims. I have COVID, and they spit on police. This is not something that is isolated and only happens with the Home for the Wanderers and the kids of the Home for the Wanderers. I've seen personally, you watch the news, and there was a town selectman, I think, a board member somewhere in Massachusetts that was spitting on police up in New Hampshire last year. There was a 90-year-old guy or 80-year-old guy on a hike a couple months ago that made the news up in New Hampshire for spitting on someone else who didn't have a mask on, saying, I have COVID, and he spit on them. And that gentleman was arrested. It's a very serious thing to do, and it's unfortunate that people use that. So we apologize for that, and we hope that it doesn't happen, and we do our very best to prevent that sort of thing from happening. So, my apologies, Chief, to you and your staff for that sort of behavior. But we're all doing the best that we can, given the rules that we have been asked to play by. And for us, we just can't restrain the kids just because they want to walk outside of our building. And we don't always have the ability to restrain them from leaving the property. We do our best to follow. We do our best to encourage them to come back quickly. But again, we all have sort of the rules that we have to play by. So thank you all. I have, again, 3 folks that have joined me, and I'd ask each of them, I think each of them wants to say something, and we're more than happy to take any questions that any of you may have. First, I'll introduce Kathy O'Leary.
Yes, Ms. O'Leary, please. Is there something you would like to add to what Attorney Ash has presented?
I think he's covered it. I was just going to introduce myself. I'm the Vice President of Congregate Care. I supervise all of the residential and group home programs for the Home for Little Wonders, including the home at Walpole and Duggan House. So I was just introducing myself.
Okay. Anything from either Mr. Quinn or Ms. Reed? I'd be more than happy to recognize either of you who'd like to offer something.
I'd be happy.
Mr. Quinn.
Hi. My name is Rob Quinn. I'm the Senior Director of Milieu Services at the Home for Little Wonders. Among other things, I oversee the management of the COVID positive group home. I oversaw it when it was at Duggan, and now that it's located in Roxbury House, I oversee the management of that program as well. I suppose, to reiterate what Mr. Ash said earlier, the COVID group home at Duggan was licensed by EEC. Prior to operating the group home, we worked with EEC and DPH to establish policies and procedures regarding the care the care and safety of clients and staff. One thing I'd like to add to what Mr. Ash said is that actually our policies and protocols were shared with other providers across the state and then became the basis for all protocols and procedures, sort of the golden standard for how all of those COVID isolation programs operate statewide. So including things like the use of PPE, routines for starting and ending shifts, routines for cleaning, for reporting, routines for keeping kids occupied and healthy during their quarantines. So I mean, I know he said it's not a resort, but we certainly try in our COVID isolation units. I think we know that kids are being pulled out of familiar environments to isolate with a really terrible illness. So we do our best in our isolation units to ensure, that all of our kids, are definitely entertained and feel well taken care of. And that includes things like, every kid is in an individual bedroom. That really they only leave to go to the bathroom while they're there. Food is delivered to them. We order food from basically any takeout place. We'd ordered from probably 10 or 15 different places throughout Walpole while it was in Walpole. Each kid has their own smart TV with, a Netflix account, a Disney Plus account, an HBO account. Each kid has either, one of the newer Xboxes or one of the newer PlayStation systems, to be able to play video games, all to kind of keep their spirits up and to help keep them entertained, to ensure that they're not sort of gallivanting around the greater Walpole community. So we kind of went to pretty great lengths to ensure that, that program was successful. I think between April and January, while the program was open, we served more than 70 kids, and we only had 2 incidents during the course of our operation where kids from the Duggan House left the building. One of the things that we did, kind of prior to opening was worked with DCF after kind of building our protocols with EEC. to talk about what kids we thought would be successful based on the model of care that we were providing. And we certainly talked about kids who, exhibited certain behaviors versus other behaviors. And one of the behaviors that we said we actually, we really couldn't support kids in isolating was, a behavior of running from programs. So we kind of put in writing that we really didn't want and didn't think that we would serve well kids who had that history of running. There were kind of, like I said, out of the 70 some kids that we had served at that program, there were 2 that had eloped. And one was found about an hour and a half after they left. This was kind of an instance where, when we take in kids, we can have different supervision protocols for different kids. One of the supervision protocols, we would know that they're a kid who runs from programs or has that history. Where we actually change our supervision protocols. In neither of these, the instances where the kid ran, did we have information that they had a history of running? And because we didn't have that information, we didn't enact those protocols. So I'm happy to answer, at whatever point is appropriate, any questions about the operation of the COVID positive unit. And I certainly appreciate the board hearing us today.
Thank you, Mr. Quinn. Ms. Reed, anything that you'd like to add?
Sure, thank you so much. And thank you all for, giving us this time to speak up. I will be mindful of time because I know it is getting late. But, a lot of people have focused on, just the things that have gone wrong and whatnot. But, I'm going to kind of veer off my script and say there's so many things that have gone right. And yeah, we've had a couple bad instances where kids' behaviors were really horrific and embarrassing. And, Chief Carmichael and Kelleher know my feelings about that. I reached out to them immediately following it. But we also have so many phenomenal things that happen. And despite our kids coming from really rough places, they are some of the brightest, most, amazing, some of them funny and resilient kids ever, probably more resilient than many of us on this call right now. And sometimes, they make poor choices. And that's why we're there. We're there to teach them, and we're there to guide them and hopefully, talk through it so they don't make the same poor choice. But they do. And it sucks and it's embarrassing. And I spend plenty of nights, sleepless, just like Chief Carmichael does. I know he holds on to every person that gets away and every police call and thing that happens in the town. I do the same with the Walpole kids. But it's never our intention to be a burden on anyone. We actually really want to be a part of the Walpole community. We donate to things, we participate in things. Carol Johnson knows that I dream of selling our produce at the farmer's market. And let me tell you, we have some amazing zucchini that we grew in our garden last year, and you'll see us there next year. We want to be a positive in Walpole. We want to be accepted by Walpole. We want the townspeople to know our kids and kind of pull them in. That's kind of what we're asking for. So thank you.
Appreciate that. And thank you for your presentation, Attorney Ash. Any questions from anybody on the board to any of the representatives from the Home for Little Wanderers?
I have a couple of questions. What is the ratio staff per residence? Does anybody know?
So I can speak to that. We offer a couple of different service deliveries. So we have programs where the ratio is 1 staff to 3 youth. That's what we would call our group home level of care, which is, kind of what most of our programs is a 1 to 3. Our Hylar program is a 1 to 3. We also have a program, our Adams program on site for kids living with intellectual and developmental diagnoses, in addition to the complex early childhood trauma that kind of impacts most of our kids. And the ratio for that program is 1 to 2.
So, it sounds like it's pretty manageable when you have 1 staff to 3 youth. And despite this, there's a lot of unfortunate incidents happening at the Home for Little Wanderers. I mean, I don't know, Attorney Ash accused, obviously, the local police department of making up stories. I'm not sure, maybe Chief Carmichael has a comment. Also, Mr. Quinn, you mentioned that there will be changes to the supervision protocols. In what way? Like you just spoke in general way. What, can you be more specific and give us examples, please?
Absolutely, I would be happy to. You know, so I think we're a program, you know, our COVID, and just a reminder for everybody on the call, that this program is no longer in Walpole. We voluntarily worked with the Department of Early Education and Care in DCF to move our operations to a site that we had vacant in Boston. So no longer in the town of Walpole, but I'm still happy to answer the question. You know, different behaviors, you know, for example, you know, we don't really have the right of refusal at that program. So, you know, any kid with COVID, you know, across the state of Massachusetts that's in DCF custody, if they need isolation placement, you know, we would accept them. We've, as I mentioned, we've let folks know the profile of the kid that we believe would do well. You know, and sometimes, you know, like I've been on the phone at 9 o'clock at night with, you know, the Deputy Commissioner of Health and Human Services talking about, you know, they're really desperate and need some support with kids. So even though we said we really don't think kids with a history of running would be successful in our program, you know, sometimes, you know, we would get a call and say, we have this kid who's at a program in Haverhill, you know, and one of the things that they've struggled with in their past, you know, in placements has been running. You know, so some of the interventions that we could utilize and some of the different protocols that we could utilize are we could add an additional staff. We could do what's called an add-on or a one-to-one for that particular youth. That's not typically where we would start, but we might, you know, for our supervision protocols for our program, you know, that we sort of developed in conjunction with EEC, you know, in order to prevent the transmission of COVID, in that particular program, doors are cracked and staff, you know, are kind of walking through the program and checking on kids every 15 minutes or so. You know, when we have a kid who we know has a run history, rather than, you know, kind of having that 15-minute protocol, we would actually place that staff, instead of being at the end of the hallway, we would place that staff in front of their door, the door to their bedroom, so that they would be kind of right in front of the door. You know, so that's an example of one way that we might make changes to our protocols, our supervision protocols.
Does that answer your question, Mona?
I mean, in a way, like when you talk about the staffing, what are they licensed, the staff? Like, do you have social workers? I mean, can you like talk to us about the qualifications of the staffing in that facility, Mr. Quinn?
So we sort of built our model, you know, that we thought would be successful around the traditional group home model, you know, wherein there's program leadership and administration, where there's a clinical presence, where there's a presence of nursing, and then where there are direct care staff who are typically running your milieu throughout the day. So, you know, like I said, we have a ratio of 1 to 3. So there's, you know, because it's an accommodation program and youth can show up at any time. We staff the program as though it were full, regardless of how many kids are actually in the program. So, you know, for example, if our capacity is 6, that means that we'll have no fewer than 2 staff on at a time. And these are our direct care folks. You know, I can sort of offer anecdotally, like these are people who generally have college degrees, people who have gone through all of the Home for Little Wanderers robust, you know, sort of training that all of our staff receive prior to entering their positions at the home, which includes, you know, a 40-hour course, you know, in therapeutic crisis intervention, making sure that people know how to do the physical restraints that we had talked about, but they would have received all of that training, and some training around just the you know, sort of the basics of trauma-informed care. You know, so when we talk to our staff, you know, they have a pretty thorough understanding of the way that trauma impacts the brain, and the way that we, as staff people need to support kids who have had those experiences of complex early childhood trauma. Because unfortunately, you can't talk to our kids the way that you would talk to, say, your nieces and nephews who are the same age. We kind of have to treat our kids differently because trauma literally impacts the physical composition of the brain. So the folks who are leading those programs, currently, when we moved, we utilized a program director who was, who's also a licensed clinician. We did have a licensed clinician who was providing some clinical support and case management to the program while it was in Walpole. We also had a leadership presence there. We had Josh Grant was overseeing the program. Some of you may be familiar with Josh. I'm not sure how long you've kind of been around the town of Walpole, but Josh was actually in Rebecca's position for several years as the program director of the main campus at Walpole. And had a pretty fantastic relationship with the town and built up a lot of trust over years, which is one of the reasons that we selected him. So he was overseeing that at the sort of program director level. And we also had some a milieu management. Her name is Lisa Klinkenberg. And she's gone on to, as we've kind of moved the program away from Walpole, she's moved on to manage another program. But, again, very talented leader whose focus is mostly on the day-to-day operations, while Josh focused on the big picture, the communication, with the state.
Okay, thank you. I mean, it seems that you have pretty qualified staff over there, and despite that, I mean, there are complaints of abuse and neglect by the hands of the people supposedly taking care of these kids. Several suicide attempts, several successful and unsuccessful escapes from the Home for Little Wanderers. I don't know, like jeopardizing kids' safety when the kids, like, there were incidents when kids are jumping from the second or third floor wearing flip-flops and tank tops. I mean, where is the supervision? Like, I'm questioning the ability of the facility administration or operators. I mean, it seems that they failed to protect these kids and provide them with a secure and safe environment, physically and mentally. And I guess that's why we're here today, unless we see significant long-term changes. I'm honestly for proceeding with the cease and desist order, because I believe in the past that, like, the Home for Little Wanderers promised to make changes that were temporarily, and now we're here again.
Mr. Ash.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Masonic, thank you for your statement. I would respond to a couple of things. I didn't mean to indicate that I thought that Chief Carmichael was making up stories. I think there are inconsistencies and inaccuracies in some of the reporting. I don't mean to say that he's done this in some ill-spirited way to make things up. I think there are just inconsistencies and inaccuracies in the reporting and in the letter, and I don't know if that is a result of the reporting that's made to them, or if it's a result of reporting as it went from the chief to your council and to the letter that was provided by the Board of Health. I don't know where that inconsistency came in, only that some of the reporting is inconsistent and inaccurate, and some of it is duplicated. Your concerns about the running, again, I would state that we are limited, and it's not a failure to act or do nothing. We are just limited in what we can do, and we can't necessarily restrain a child that decides to go for a walk. And even if that walk takes them off of campus, you're not necessarily permitted to automatically put hands on a child and restrain them to try to hold them from leaving. So that's the response to that.
Are they supervised when these kids, like, say I would like to go for a walk and they have a history of running away? Are they being escorted, for example, by one of the staff? Are they supervised when
That's
they
a great
go?
question. That's a great question. And to the extent that they are able to, and I think the folks in the program could answer it more clearly and maybe give some examples, but my understanding is that, and I know for a fact that there are times that staff do follow clients if the staffing is available, if it's safe. Staff will follow clients, but there's only so far that they can go before they have to return to the campus. They're not going to follow the staff, the clients, 2 miles into Walpole Center on foot. They just can't do that. There are certain limitations where they have to come back and take care of the other clients that are there as well. Sometimes they do have to make decisions. Are we going to care for the kids that are at the program, or because again, there aren't as many staff as there are kids. You can see a scenario where you could have on a 1-to-3 ratio where there's 2 staff and 6 kids. If 6 kids go in 6 different directions, those 2 staff can only follow 2 of those kids, meaning 4 kids are going to go in directions that they can't be followed. So there are instances where we just cannot follow, but when we can, we do. And then your comments about self-harm and things like that, suicide attempts, these are unfortunate events that happen on occasion when kids do self-harm. And I believe one of the incidents that was cited by the police, I did feel that one of them was inaccurate, where the folks at the Home for Little Wanderers told me that it was inaccurate. But I would say that the Home for Little Wanderers goes to great lengths to supervise the kids, to watch those kids. As Mr. Quinn had indicated, sometimes, there are mandatory 15-minute checks. So when the kids aren't sort of being watched actively, they're checked on every 15 minutes. That goes for during the overnight. So in the middle of the night, while those kiddos are sleeping, staff walk up and down those halls, they open those doors, and they look, and they see whether they see, you guys will say what it is, it's hair, skin, or something, right? Like you have to put eyes on a kid every 15 minutes. Now these are smart little kids, right? So they know that if you do it on the 15s, they're going to know that. So they're not necessarily on the 15s. It's going to be, they move it a few minutes either direction, the staff do, but it's all night long. And the reality is that sometimes those kids know, okay, someone just checked on me, I've got 15 minutes. Because these kids aren't on a 1-to-1, they're not watched all night long. So there are incidents that happen, but we do all that we can with the resources that we have, and we do great work by these kids, and they do the very best that they can. But there are limitations. Go ahead, if I might. Rob seems like to answer. Is that okay?
Would it be all right if I?
Yes, Mr. Quinn, please.
Sure. I mean, I think we're in the midst of a global pandemic, and I think that we are a part of a continuum of care that serves a system of care that serves kids with complex mental health issues because of the kind of aforementioned complex early childhood trauma. And I think Chief Carmichael would certainly say that he's kind of seen this play out itself. And when you hear about kids who are suicidal or who are making suicide attempts, we're not talking about a majority of our kids. We're talking about a couple of our kids, who kind of throw themselves up against this mental health system of care that we have right now. So, an example, and just to kind of illustrate this for you, is we have a kid, she's turning 18 soon, and she's been to the emergency room probably, I've been at the home for about a year, but probably 5 or 6 times, for things like suicidal ideation, because of how jam-packed emergency rooms are and inpatient mental health care is in the state over the course of this pandemic. She's not being seen inpatient. So she'll go, she'll be evaluated because she made a suicide, attempt, or because she's declared her intention to harm herself. The mental health evaluators will find that she's met level of care for inpatient level of care. They'll do a bed search in the emergency room for 3 days, and if they don't find a bed available for this young person, they'll send her back to the Home for Little Wanderers without any changes to medication, without any serious work done around the issues that brought her to the emergency room. But because she's stable and because she's not actively trying to harm herself, she'll come back to the Home for Little Wanderers. And it's possible that Chief Carmichael knows who I'm talking about right now. And then so 3 days later, we have the same kid with the same issues who hasn't had an effective mental health intervention. It's nothing that we have control over. It's nothing the police have control over. But there's been no real meaningful intervention. And we're working, with the kids' clinical team. We're developing safety plans. We're working with their DCF team to try and, add resources on to be able to support this kid. And when a kid needs an emergency inpatient mental health stay, a kid needs an emergency inpatient mental health stay. So because during this pandemic, all of our kids' mental health concerns have been exacerbated, not just the really high risk kids and not just the kids at the Home for Little Wanderers. I can offer anecdotally that I coach a high school girls baseball team, not softball, baseball. And I've had 2 kids on that team who, go to, the exam schools in Boston Public Schools and who are high functioning youth, but they've been inpatient during the pandemic because that's the impact that this pandemic is having on mental health. And because those resources for mental health placement are so limited, we're often getting kids who kind of cycle back to us without having received that intervention that they need. So when you read about X number of, kids who are experiencing that suicidality, that expressing suicidal ideations, these are kids who, who the larger mental health system is really struggling to support right now. So we're certainly a member of that system, and we're working within, our capabilities to be able to support those kids. But when you hear of kids over and over who are expressing suicidalities, that was a concern here, as I just wanted to offer some perspective as to why that might be happening, and also to help folks understand that it's not, half of the kids on our campus. It's really a couple of kids who are really struggling. Does that make sense?
So these kids, the high risk kids, and you mentioned that they have like a clinical team. Like, are they being followed up by doctors, by nurses? Is there a doctor who usually visits the Home for Little Wanderers? Nurses available?
Yeah, absolutely. That we have on-site psychiatry for our youth to be able to access. I think when kids are on the medication regimens, like a lot of our kids are on complex medication regimens, and those meds do serious things. So a lot of times the best environment to make significant medication changes in is an inpatient environment, because these, medications that some of our kids take, like antipsychotics, can have really significant side effects when a kid either ramps up and goes on antipsychotics, or when a kid comes off antipsychotics, and not just antipsychotics but other classes of meds as well. So there are med changes that are that sometimes our psychiatry staff will make, and things will smooth out. I mean, I think we certainly have have experts and have folks to be able to support the kids, but I mean, those systems, the inpatient level of care exists, certainly for a reason, and there are times when our kids, would benefit from those services, and they're just not available. But we at the home don't provide inpatient level of care.
So in regards to their medication, does your staff make sure that these kids are taking their medications on a regular basis and they're not skipping because, you can't,
yes, we operate, because of our contract under Caring Together, we operate with a system called MAP, and I don't want to bore everybody with all of the details of our complex medication administration system.
Thank you.
But this is the program that programs who are contracted through Caring Together use, statewide, and it's really kind of a when I worked in this field in Pennsylvania, 12, 15 years ago, this was also the system that we were using. It's a system that tracks every single pill from when it arrives at the facility until either a youth takes it or it's disposed of. So when kids skip their doses, there's communication right away. It's not like we're waiting for kids to miss like 6 doses. Our kids do have the right to refuse their medication, and that's something that's documented and followed up on, not only by our psychiatry team, but by the kids' clinician, by staff that have good relationships with the kids to try and help them understand, like, hey, these are really important for you. But kids who have so little control over, their choices that they can make. I mean, kids who have been removed from their homes, who are very limited in when they can see their families, who were pulled out of their school district to go to a local school district or a 766 therapeutic school. Like, one of the only things that they can really have any control over is like the things that go in their body or on their body. So sometimes our kids will refuse medications just as a means of like finding something that they can have a little bit of control of. But like I said, when a kid refuses their medication, the first dose, we have layers of intervention to support the kid to make a better choice next time. And it's often, almost always successful.
Anything further from anybody on the board?
Could I speak to that? My own experience when I was a mentor at Longview Farm was when I would be present when medications were given out. It was done very, very. I was very impressed with the way medications were handed out and the way students responded to take the medications. I was never present when anyone refused to get it. It was almost like, okay, I've got mine now, and you're going to get yours too. It was like everybody's getting them, and it's like, well, why can't I have some if he's got some? That was kind of the feeling that I got there, and it was a very positive time when medications were handed out, and they were always handed out by the same staff member. It was very consistent in that manner. I was impressed.
I appreciate you saying that.
Any further questions or comments from the board before we move on to Chief Carmichael and Melissa?
I just have one thing that I would speak to Attorney Ash. You mentioned it was a very casual thing, and I was kind of concerned about that. You said that it's okay if kids want to go for a walk, and if they want to walk off campus. To me, I never saw that as being okay. There was one young man that I was close to. I was his mentor, and he ran into a conflict with another student and took off. And immediately, 2 other staff members said, "Stay right here, Carol. We'll get him." And it wasn't "we'll get him, we're going to hurt him," but they went and gathered him. And then he came to me, and I gathered him up in my arms and gave him some hugs and said, "It's okay. That young man didn't understand how wonderful you are, and that's why he called you a name." And I mean, my own kids are like that. My goodness, sometimes they just, with the gray hair and everything. I was a grandmother figure to these boys, and I loved it. but I saw so many positive things when I was there. Loved it, and I'm sorry the mentor program isn't being utilized right now. And if it ever is again, I'm first in line.
Thank you, Carol.
Maybe I could speak a little bit to that.
Please do.
Sure. So, I mean, I think one of the things that we talk about in our therapeutic crisis intervention is the professional dynamic risk assessment that people make when kids are upset or frustrated or acting out. And it's based on the relationships, the deep relationships that our staff who care for our kids every day have. Because I know a kid really well, I can look at how a kid is reacting to a situation, and I can make my professional dynamic risk assessment of the things that I've experienced that this kid has done before, and how kids have acted under similar circumstances, who's available to support that kid. So there might be a situation where a kid runs off and 2 staff are like, "Ooh, we got to go get this kid right away." There might also, and this is certainly, I want to acknowledge that this is not as common, not nearly as common. And I can think of maybe one kid on campus for whom this would be the response right now, more more previously, but one right now where you might say like, "Whoo, that kid needs a little bit of space. I'm just going to let him blow off steam. I'm going to keep him in my eyesight. I know that he's going to like walk down the block, like a block and a half, get his space, turn around and come right back." So I think that might be more along the lines of, of what John was referring to, is like, we're able to make a professional dynamic risk assessment and say, these kids are, this kid, wow, that kid, the level of risk for them, to kind of be a danger to themselves or community or property is such that, gosh, we need 2 people to go after that kid right away. And there might be a kid who we might say like, okay, all right, Billy just needs a hot minute to take a deep breath. He'll walk to the end of this thing, he'll turn around and he'll come right back. I'm going to keep my eyes on him the whole time, but I'm not going to restrain him to try and prevent him from walking the streets of to walking down Lincoln Road kind of thing.
Huh? Well, I mean, I do appreciate that, but I don't want to get too far into the weeds in terms of the specific kinds of things that are done with a particular client. I'd rather that we stay more on the larger picture of the key issues within the cease and desist order, but I do appreciate all of your input. If there's nothing else from the board, we'll ask Chief Carmichael to offer his thoughts. Okay, I'm not hearing anything from the board. Chief Carmichael, I recognize you, please.
Good evening. How you doing? Thank you for having us tonight. Some good comments, a lot there. Obviously a lot of information to kind of digest, I know, for the board here tonight. One of the first things, I just want to preface my remarks to say that nobody advocates for the wellness and the safety of the kids at the Home for Little Wanderers than members of the Walpole Police Department. And in collaboration and partnership with people like Rebecca and Rob and Kathy, and the people that the staff members down there at the Home for Little Wanderers, we have had a very good relationship for a long time. I've been responding to the Home for Little Wanderers for over 20 years. And most recently, even though we do have some issues, and I don't want to minimize those issues because they're real, we're talking about the safety of children. But we do our best. One of the good things that we've done recently is, and not too recently, but over the last 5 years, is we've assigned 2 police officers almost full time to work as liaisons to the Home for Little Wanderers, Officer Van Ness and Officer George Bird, and who do a phenomenal job. And a lot of times, even when the department has taken some criticism from the community and how we handle things at the home, a lot of times I've talked to people who don't even know where it is, who've never set foot on the property. But we have. Our officers know the kids at the home, the staff at the home, as well as anybody. And we know what the risks are. So I'll kind of get into 2 different things. One is just the issues we've been dealing with, and then I'll get into a little bit of the issues of what we've been doing since this most recent activities taken place. As far as protection of the kids, and I'll talk about Duggan House in specifics. One of our concerns back when they were opening Duggan House for COVID positive patients was that was the security and the staffing and the ability to keep the kids in-house and keep them contained and keep them quarantined so that it didn't affect other people at the home, staff members, and the community. That's part of our job. We try to protect public safety and public health. And we expressed those concerns. And however, there was a lot of kids that had come in and come out of that facility. We did have some issues that were right in line with what our concerns were, such as a couple of incidents where kids did leave the building, multiple kids at the same time. And in fact, it was one incident where kids jumped out of the second floor window. They weren't dressed for the cold weather. They didn't have shoes on. They didn't have appropriate attire on. And that in of itself is risk to those kids, especially when they're infected with the virus. So we had a couple of different incidents like that. And our officers respond up there as we do, and we executed a search. We did locate some kids, and there was officers that were spit at when they were located. And so, that puts our officers and our officers' safety is paramount to me too. So, that puts them in a little bit of danger as well. So those were our concerns with that particular case. There was another incident where I know we're kind of minimizing it somewhat, that, sometimes the kids are just leaving and they're going for a walk. And that's true. These kids come from difficult backgrounds. Many are coming from all over the state. Specifically with Duggan House, you have kids that are coming in there that aren't familiar with the area. They're not from the home. They're not from the home down there. And when they leave and they walk away, there's other environmental risks that surround the home down there. As an example, there's a significant amount of swampland. There's an active gun range to the west. There is MBTA tracks that run to the east of the facility. It's dark, it's wooded, it's difficult to navigate. It's not good terrain, and therefore we put a little more emphasis on the safety of those kids when they just walk away, and more so when there's kids that we've identified that are at risk. And when I say at risk, I mean kids that are 13 or under. Kids that might be at risk of sexual exploitation or human trafficking, mental illness history, just a history of repetitive or frequent running away. When we some of these kids aren't just walking away to blow off steam. However, the vast majority of them are. They are just trying to get away. Some of them are teenagers, and that's what teenagers do. But there are other instances when these kids are getting into a motor vehicle, and they're getting in the motor vehicle with a stranger, and they're ending up in Springfield and parts of Boston and God only knows where. And when they do that, the police, while the staff members aren't required to physically restrain them and everything, once the police are involved, we are by statute required to enter that kid into the system, into our computer in the national database as a missing person. They may be a missing or an exploited person, or a person that has different types of added risk that we would put in there. But they sometimes leave and they end up in other situations which are extremely dangerous, and documented danger where we've found kids in, rented out facilities. We've found kids that have been trafficked. And where we were talking about some of the police reports being embellished, they're public record. I mean, you can get every police report that we've responded to down there. And frankly, you would be horrified at some of the stuff you would read and some of the things that you would see that happen to these kids when they leave. Either through the report or through the intelligence that we develop. So there's so much to this. But again, the main point I want to make is that, this isn't all of the kids, and that's a very good point to make. It is only usually a small group of kids who are more at risk, who are frequent flyers. They run more often. They're prone to do that. And what we're looking for is for those instances to have those kids identified at risk earlier, maybe have one-to-one ratio, maybe have increased staff, maybe put actionable steps in place that could prevent it. When we talk about the staff not having policies where they can't get hands-on and they can't restrain kids, that's a policy flaw. And I'll tell you why. Because when those kids that aren't allowed to be restrained, and even at-risk kids that aren't being restrained, that run away and become further at risk, now the police are involved. And what do you think happens when the police and that child engage each other and they don't want to go back? Or maybe they have distrust for the police because of situations that have occurred in their lives. And the next thing you know, the police are getting assaulted, and then you have a use of force incident, and now you don't have a staff member restraining a child, you have a police officer doing it. And that doesn't sit well with me. And the deputy chief's on here, and I know it doesn't sit well with him. So these types of situations, we can talk about policy all we want. Policy doesn't always mean that it's right. And that's what we really try to work hard with Rebecca and DCF and Rob and people like that we try and get together and we try and figure these things out so that we are doing the right response. There's certainly a divergence of philosophy between how the police think we should handle it and how DCF thinks they should handle it. And that's why it's important for us to continue to work together to solve the problems that we deal with down there. And again, I don't want to minimize it because there's certainly plenty, the vast majority of times, the kids are just walking away. They're blowing off steam. They're kids, they're teenagers, we get that. But there are times when these kids are 100% in danger. They are endangered when they leave there. And we're not talking about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I'm talking about, I've been down there and just in the past 2 months, twice at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning with my flip-flops on, helping the officers look for kids. One of which, we were still searching for the kids for a couple of hours and they had already made it into a motor vehicle, which we have on videotape. And our officers and detectives tracked that child out to Springfield, Massachusetts. Getting into a car at 2 o'clock in the morning for 15-year-old female, that's a problem. And ending up out in Springfield. And this isn't embellishing anything. We have police reports. All of the information that are in these documents are cited through an actual police report. And you're welcome to look at them. They're public record. I'm not going to get too much further deep into this whole situation. What I'm going to do now is kind of focus on what we've been doing since. And some of the things that we've been doing, other than working with Greg, Attorney Corbo, and Melissa, and the Board of Health, we looked at this 2 prongs. We need to talk about the licensing, and we needed to talk about the public health issues that we were seeing down there. And again, not to minimize that. I have, and the deputy and the town administrator, Jim Johnson, have met with the commissioner of DC. Recently, we did that on January 9th. She was very open and listened to a lot of the information that we shared with her. I've been in contact multiple times with the Executive Officer of Public Safety and Security, Tom Turco. I've been in touch with Colonel Mason from the State Police on the Human Trafficking Task Force that will assist us in situations such as the one that I explained, where a child is being picked up and at risk for exploitation, and having additional resources to help us track them down, to locate them. I'm working on a memorandum of agreement that would help us, the Walpole Police Department, through our liaisons and through Rebecca and the staff at Home for Little Wanderers and DCF and DC, to all come to the table to get together so that we have a unified partnership that just focuses on keeping the safety of those kids paramount and working together to do that. We have now this is something that's never happened before. We're now allowed to participate in the high-risk assessment meetings. Officer Van Ness and Officer Bird, our liaisons, are now part of these meetings, these bi-weekly meetings, where they're allowing us to have input in identifying the kids who should be identified as at risk, and using different criteria, and that's very important, because that's one of the problems that we have when as an example, a child who's been at the home for 6 months and has run away, say, 30 times. We've had situations like that where they frequently run away, and they may or may not be at that added risk, but we can identify that person as at risk, and we can do an assessment, and that our officers, Van Ness and Bird, who are very familiar with these kids, they're on a first name basis with them, can help and have that input as far as helping the staff and helping DCF understand what we're dealing with so that we can intervene and we can provide maybe additional resources earlier in the process before something bad happens. Because I'll be honest with you, there's times when I don't sleep at night thinking about some of the issues that we've had to deal with down there. I don't want to see the tragedy occur. Not for the kids at Home for Little Wonders or any kid who lives in Walpole. And I think that they're from Walpole. They are Walpole kids. They live here. The pilot program. So the Walpole Police Department, where we're trying to, I know this is a little bit of scrutiny on the department here, but we are working with the Home for Little Wonders and the DCF have established like a pilot program. Because I think that we do things here with the police department and the home that many departments and other child care facilities across the state don't do. A lot of times, these kids are they're written off. They leave, they run away, people put them in the database, and that's it. Nobody worries about them until the day somebody comes across them and runs them in the computer and brings them back. We don't do that. We're not going to do that. We're going to be proactive in trying to help them and return them to safety. So we've worked with our pilot program, we've worked with Janon Rollins from DCF. She's a contractor, and Kara Adams from DC. And these meetings, they discuss case studies and situations most recently that have happened, and they try and come up with ideas on how to solve those issues. Some of the strategies that they've implemented is allowing us to partake in the discussions and allowing us to have some input with that intimate relationship that Officer Van Ness and Bird have with some of the kids. And it's very valuable, I think, in providing that. So Merrill House, the population is down to help, provide better safety and oversight of the kids. I think it's 9. Now Rebecca could probably know that off the top of her head, but transferring and placement of other kids. Like we said, the vast majority of the kids, there's never any issues. There's a couple of kids or a group of kids that are not in the right facility and may need to either extra resources or extra intervention, or perhaps even placement at a different facility that suits them better. And these things, these things happen. The incidents that we were having in the last couple of months, I believe, some of those kids have been broken up and placed in other settings. I know the home has been doing some 1-to-1 ratios down there. And another thing coming up is that there's going to be a week-long training through the women. It's a national women's group, and they're doing a week-long training with DCF and our liaisons. I think Rebecca's going to be involved in it, and DC to kind of gather some information kind of on the national level of what's happening with kids with runaways and exploited children and that kind of thing. And so I also know that now the Duggan House has been closed, and those kids are now at a different location. So that issue's no longer there. But so there is a lot of positive things that do take place. However, like I said in the beginning, I don't want to minimize the safety of these kids, and I don't want to minimize the risk that they can be exposed to when they walk away. And that's all I have. I'll take any questions.
I appreciate that, Chief. I share your overall concern. I know, as the members of the board know, one of the things that we never want to have happen is to be interviewed by the new Center 5 truck in front of town hall about some incident that may have occurred, whether it be a home for little wanderers thing or a health issue or whatever. It's we always have the safety and security of the residents and visitors to this town as our utmost goal. I do have a question though for you, Chief, if you don't mind. Since we issued the cease and desist order back just before Christmas, have there been a change in the number of incidents that you're aware of, or incidents that perhaps haven't been reported in a timely manner, or what's your perception of what's happened over, say, the last 5 weeks, I guess, or 6 weeks since the cease and desist was issued?
Well, on the policy side of it, the things that I just mentioned have been some of the changes. So there's been a lot of changes that have taken place with our police liaisons, working with DCF and working with DC. There's been executive level discussions such as myself, the deputy, the town administrator, Jim Johnson, and, like EOPS, HHS, the colonel of the state police. So those discussions have taken place. So there's been a lot of changes there. There's been a significant decrease in the amount of calls that we've had up there. And frankly, sometimes that concerns me too, because I never want the home to think that because, there's issues of resources and use of resources, and that, I don't care about that. And I always want to be very careful that I don't want the home to think that when that topic comes up, that we don't want you to call the police, like when you have to call the police. Like, we don't want situations to be underreported. We want situations reported that should be reported, and where we can be used as a resource to help in the safety and the oversight of the kids. So there has been decrease. I know that, like I mentioned, there has been 1-to-1 ratios. There reduced population in one of the homes, I think Merrill. There's been, different other, some kids have been transferred to like a different facility and that kind of thing. So there's little things like that I think can sometimes make a big difference, believe it or not. Staffing levels, we all wish we had enough staff to do all the things we wish we do. And, the Home for Little Wanderers is just like everybody else. They get a budget, and they only have so many people they can have as staff and do the best job you can. So those are mostly the issues that have been having. We've had one incident like over the past week where, it was delayed, I think, in reporting. I'm not sure if it was a miscommunication or anything like that, but there was an assault and battery between a staff member and a resident, and that was, wasn't reported, I think, until after the weekend. It's not a major deal. It could have just been a miscommunication type of thing, but the calls have been down. Our liaisons, however, are still working kind of behind the scenes on a lot of different changes.
Appreciate that, Chief. Thank you. Any questions from any member of the board for the Chief?
No, I just want to say that I agree totally with Chief Carmichael that we really need to be proactive and just help these kids before they do something crazy, even if it means like extra supervision or relocating them to the right facility. I totally agree.
Thank you, Mona. Melissa, from your perspective.
So just to touch upon the public health concern, there was a public health concern. Obviously, there was many cases on the campus of COVID-19. Obviously, it's a very contagious virus, so it's hard for someone to contain it. That being said, if people aren't adhering to the isolation and quarantine guidelines, they would be in offense, and they would, not be following what they should be doing. So that would cause a public health concern, obviously affecting those potentially in contact with them at the school, staff included, as well as those residents outside of the campus should an individual flee from the campus. So 100% that is a public health concern. And I feel, and I think the board agrees, it would be negligence on our part if we didn't take action when that was brought to our attention. I think the board would echo, as well as probably Chief Carmichael and other members of town. I find that Home for Little Wanderers is very reactive versus proactive. I think along the way we built great communication. I will speak about Josh from the Duggan House, Kathy who's on the call right now, and Rebecca. You guys have been great recently with getting me cases, and we've had a great communication along the way. However, when everything started and the Duggan House was going into play, there was a lack of communication. And I do feel it's important. It is licensed through the state, however, it does reside in Walpole. So that is something that is in our control and something that we do take seriously, and that we want to make sure that we're doing our part to protect not only those residents around, but also the staff and students that are there. Since we've had discussions, since the cease and desist order has been in place, we've had great communication with Home for Little Wanderers. There's actively no cases on site at the home. I think just my concern is moving forward. Yes, a good majority had COVID at Home for Little Wanderers, so it might not be a concern with COVID. However, my concern would be to make sure that we have adequate monitoring moving forward and great communication so that other issues don't arise causing a public health concern. I think I totally agree with Chief Carmichael. I think it's potentially even bigger than the staff on the call today. I think something needs to be done, and whether it's through the licensing boards, action needs to be made. And clearly there are those individuals that need additional assistance and that would potentially need additional staffing, and it seems like it's not being provided. So I think that's something that would definitely need to be taken in consideration. And it seems like the chief has started that dialogue with those entities. So again, I don't think closing out today should be a close in the chapter. I think we should continue it and make sure that we're keeping the lines of communication open. And again, even though a good majority had COVID in the facility, it's not to say that others potentially could come up with COVID, and we'd want to make sure that everyone's following the isolation and quarantine guidelines.
Thank you, Melissa. Any questions from anyone for either the chief or, Ms. O'Leary?
Hi, Melissa, it's nice to finally meet you after all of the communication that we've had. I just wanted to speak quickly to vaccinations. So that's something that we are actively working on. We have partnered with Osco Pharmacy, and they will be coming out next week to vaccinate our direct care staff. We've also had all of our clinical staff were able to get vaccinated at Gillette. And we've also worked with other outside community health providers to get our folks vaccinated. We're also looking into the ability to vaccinate our older adolescents. We're looking at the 16 and 17-year-olds who will potentially have the ability to get vaccinated. So we're working closely with DCF on that. So definitely some progress, not only for us, but I think for the general population that vaccinations are starting.
Thank you, Kathy, and nice to meet you too from all the phone conversations and emails that we've had.
I think we're now at the point for part 3 of the public hearing, which would be any questions or comments from the public, if there are any folks present. I do see one number that doesn't look familiar to me on the screen, but I don't know if there are other people that are
So that is Trish. She called in through town hall because our reception for some was a little faulty with all 4 of us on at once.
Okay. Then is it safe to say there are no members of the general public who wish to comment or ask any questions? I guess that would be safe to say. Are there any final questions or comments from anyone before we close the public hearing? Attorney Corbo.
Thank you through you, Mr. Chair. Just to be clear, as we proceed to the next step, we will still be in public hearing while the board engages in its deliberation and voting. The public hearing will be fully closed once that vote is taken, but you can move on from the evidentiary portion of the proceeding to the deliberation portion. And, you know, when you see fit, either now or at some future point, I can provide a summation of the legal issues for your consideration.
Okay, thank you, sir. I guess a general question for Chief Carmichael and or Melissa, if I understand correctly what I've heard you say tonight, there has been definitive improvement since the time we issued the cease and desist order back on December 22nd and today's date. Is that a fair statement to make?
I think that action is being taken to move in the right direction.
Okay.
Yeah, from our perspective, we're perpetual. So everything this is an ongoing thing. It's always progress that we're trying to make. So, yeah, but we've been, you know, sitting down with all of the stakeholders and trying to make some positive change as far as each entity.
And would it also be a fair statement? I mean, I've been on the Board of Health for about 20 years. I know, Chief, you've been involved with the town in a variety of capacities for probably at least that long, if not longer. Would it be a fair statement that the relationship with the Home for Little Wanderers has its ups and downs over time? I think Mona put it quite well by saying that the home tends to be reactive rather than proactive. That when there's an issue, things are done, steps are taken to remediate it, but then it isn't maintained. There isn't a concerted effort to make sure that whatever steps were taken stay in place or whatever. This is not the first time, obviously, that some issues with the home have cropped up before our board or before the town. So is that a relatively fair statement to make, that sometimes the diligence of staying on top of whatever the issues were fades? You know, whether that's because of staffing changes or other things, I don't know. But I think the concern that I have is that things do seem to be getting better, but we want to make sure that they don't go back and start getting worse. So I guess I would throw that out to either Attorney Ash or to the members of Home for Little Wanderers. I do wish, however, that your CEO was here to comment on this. I find that, quite frankly, personally very disappointing and disrespectful to the board. But we'll just let that go as it is. So I'll allow Attorney Ash or whoever from Home for Little Wanderers to address that general question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would say, you know, to comment on your opinion of sort of being reactive instead of proactive. You know, let me go back just to last year in April when we opened Duggan House, you know, on an emergency basis in accordance with the governor's order, and EEC's contacting us to ask if we had the capacity to open a COVID-19 group residence. We acted very quickly, and we were actually informed and asked by DPH not to say anything, that this was done quickly, and that they didn't want to duplicate efforts between DPH and the Board of Health. Again, you know, EEC is the one that had the authority to license the homes program, and we worked in concert and in partnership with DCF and EEC, the licensor, and DPH to open the facility. we fully expected to give notice, and that was part of the policies and procedures that we had created in conjunction with those partners, that we would be in touch with the Board of Health once we had something to report, once we had, clients that were at Duggan House. But we didn't have any, initially, we had to open it, but it is ECEC that opened it. And it was done proactively to sort of care for the kids, for perhaps the impending crush of COVID-19. Again, this was done back in April, and it opened slowly. We weren't throwing 6 kids immediately. Thankfully. To characterize the home as only being reactive, I would have to disagree. We've I think tried very hard over the years to establish and maintain lines of communication with the town, certainly with the police department, because we probably interact with them the most. And that's not reactionary. That's something that we try to foster. We encourage those conversations. I worked with Attorney Corbo in the spring, and encouraged the town to set up working groups that we could have. We could meet regularly, a working group with the building department, a working group with the fire and the police and the Board of Health. I asked several times to create working groups that would meet weekly, hopefully at first with Attorney Corbo and I, and then shortly after, hopefully he and I could step away and let you guys just have normal communications. We've tried very hard, and I don't think, to say that was reactive, I don't think it was a reaction to the letter. We worked, again, in concert with those partners to get started and start this COVID program early. There are concerns, to say that, to comment briefly on something the chief said, that he found that it was a policy flaw that we can't put hands on. I want to be clear. I don't mean to say that we cannot put hands on. We're just under limited circumstances when we can. There's been an effort over the last decade to reduce restraints, because restraints have proven to be harmful in some ways to kids. So we can't just restrain every kid every single time he means to walk out of the door. We do our very best to prevent kids from the young person that jumped out of the second floor Duggan House. We weren't aware that kid had a running history. We do 15-minute checks. And if in the middle of the night, someone in that 15-minute period jumps out of a window, I don't know how we can be proactive to stop that. If we don't know that they're going to run, we have no reason to believe they're going to. Because if we did, we would have tried to actively stop that from happening. Somebody jumping out of a second floor window would be one of those instances where we would put hands on and say, you can't do that. We're going to restrain you from going out of that window. So we do have instances where we are allowed to, and we do. But the reality is we just can't do it all the time. We can't stop every kid we can't put hands on everybody when they walk out, unfortunately. I don't want to say unfortunately, sometimes they go outside for totally healthy reasons. So we don't put hands on all the time. Did I hit everything that you asked, Mr. Chair? I apologize if there was more.
No, I think that you did, sir. Thank you so much.
If I could say one other thing.
Of course.
I was looking over my notes again and looking at, Chief Carmichael's list. And again, I don't mean Ms. Pisani to say that he was making anything up, only that there are some inconsistencies and some things that I feel are incorrect. And just to give an example or two, there's a reference to a kid being a blood gang associate. This young man has developmental issues, physical issues. We have no reason to believe that he's a blood gang member. In fact, we'd be shocked to hear that if you met this young man. Of the 14 instances, the way I look at them, as far as I can tell, 3 of them are COVID related. The other 10 of them are not COVID related. number 8 and 11, they are COVID, but they're the same incident. So again, I feel that the Board of Health's jurisdiction as it relates to closing the program for COVID, I'd say again that Duggan House was closed and transferred into another town, so there is not that issue. There was no, they had more than 70 kids at Duggan House over the 10 months that they were there. My understanding is that there were 2 incidences where the police were involved. I don't know of any single case where a COVID kid at Duggan House transmitted COVID to another staff person or another client. At the main campus, there was an outbreak of COVID. Where it started, we don't know. Whether it started in the staff or the clients, whether it started at their home, somebody brought it into the program. And it is unfortunate. We do our very best to limit the COVID exposure. But unfortunately, again, this is a home for kids and they interact with one another and they don't have their masks on 24 hours a day. And it's difficult despite staff trying so hard to stop it. These staff, when these kids are in crisis, these staff, as Ms. Johnson had said, sometimes, you know, and there are rules about giving hugs, but essentially, you know, staff will sit next to a kid and talk to the kid and help them work through their crisis. Part of that crisis intervention that Mr. Quinn spoke to earlier to try to stop them from running, stop them from self-harm, stop them from fighting each other, whatever it might be. Those staff members are putting themselves, you know, really, I don't mean any disrespect to frontline workers and nurses and doctors, but these folks, some of them are working with these kids, you know, very close to them, even when they knowingly have COVID. The kids, not the staff. If the staff have it, they have to go. But, you know, they're working with these kids and putting themselves in harm's way to care for these children. So, you know, I ask respectfully that you reconsider your cease and desist for these reasons and the reasons that we spoke of earlier. But I think the biggest reason is that there are no COVID kids or staff at the campus at this time. Duggan House has been relocated out of your district. And I would say, you know, Ms. Bassani especially, I absolutely respect, you know, and all you've said and your concerns for staffing levels and what we're doing, and Chief Carmichael for whether or not we put hands on and when we can put hands on. But we are under, we have to play by a set of rules under our licensor. And sometimes the rules that we play by are not necessarily in line with the rules that this board and the town would like us to play by. And I mean, you don't disrespect any of you by saying that, but we're just, and it's not that our hands are tied to the point that we can do nothing, but there's only so much that we can do, and we're doing our very best. So thank you for your time, and we appreciate you reconsidering this cease and desist order.
Well, thank you, Attorney Ash. Richard, Carol, or Mona, thoughts, questions, input?
Well, I appreciate this meeting. I appreciate listening to everyone, what they have to say, and my feelings about Longview Farm are renewed. You know, it's a place that part of my heart is still there, not as big a piece as it was before. And I was really discouraged about what seemed to be happening there. But it sounds as though good things are happening, and these young people are receiving the love and care that they deserve. And I'm happy to hear that there are no COVID cases among the residents and the staff members. That is awesome.
Mona, Richard, your thoughts or input?
It's obvious that some actions are being taken to move in the right direction. So I would definitely consider, you know, vacating. I mean, I don't know, like,
I have to say, I'm also encouraged that the communication has increased, and that it's unfortunate that the cease and desist seems like the prompt for this communication. I'd like to see if anything is to move forward, it's got to continue that communication between the town and the Home for Little Wanderers, and some way, some method to be able to continue that on a periodic basis, making sure the board is kept abreast of anything that's going on and is able to review on a periodic basis. I think would be pretty valuable. So I think if there's any suggestions of how we could keep that moving forward, I think it'd be very helpful.
Thank you, Richard. Attorney Corbo, anything that you'd like to add before we consider taking a vote?
Yes, thank you through you, Mr. Chair. Just to respond to a couple of the legal issues identified by Attorney Ash, to make clear what the board's jurisdiction here is and its authority to issue orders with respect to this facility. This is a facility that will likely be operating in the town of Walpole for some time to come, and the authority of this board must be clearly understood, in my opinion. So we start with the proposition that the Board of Health is the primary protector of public health and safety in the town of Walpole, and under Chapter 111, Section 122 of the general laws, you have the authority to examine into all nuisances and causes of sickness within the town and to issue orders to abate any such conditions. Now, while it is true that the Home for Little Wanderers is licensed by the state, it is not correct that entities regulated by the state are exempt from local regulation. Rather, entities regulated by the state are subject to anti-nuisance regulation to the same effect that any other entity is subject to such regulation. In this matter, it has been shown through the evidence presented by the police department and the health director that the conditions at the Home for Little Wanderers constituted both a nuisance and a source of sickness within the town of Walpole. With respect to nuisance, a nuisance is a condition maintained on one person's property that has an adverse effect on other persons' properties or the public at large. The evidence submitted by the chief, which, although called into question by Attorney Ash, has not been rebutted by any evidence presented to this board, and stands as unrebutted evidence to show that there have been significant nuisance conditions stemming from this facility. And while Attorney Ash accuses the town of having an ulterior purpose, the reality is that when a situation occurs that requires over 100 responses in a short period of time to one single property, responses that divert an entire police force for the benefit of one single property, that is a condition that has an adverse effect on the entire community. Others who are in need are unable to have those needs met. They are put in danger by not having adequate responses. And that's not to suggest that the residents at the home are not entitled to the same level of protection as everyone else. However, they're not entitled to a greater level of protection. The Constitution of the Commonwealth, in fact, specifically prohibits using public resources for the aid of private charitable corporations. And here, it is apparent that the upper management at Home for Little Wanderers seems to view the Walpole Police Department as its private security force, rather than employing sufficient measures and giving its staff the sufficient ability to protect its residents. So in my opinion, the nuisance standard here has been met, and legal action from the board is clearly within the scope of its authority. Likewise, with respect to sources of sickness in the community, the fact that individuals infected with COVID-19 were not properly quarantined and isolated presented a threat to the community at large, both by putting police officers at risk, and the chief can speak in this to more detail if necessary, but every time a police officer would come in contact with someone infected with COVID-19, they were required to isolate and quarantine, which means that that's now 1 less or 2 less or 5 less officers that are available to serve the remainder of the community. So, you know, the seriousness of the problem should not be downplayed. And when members of the community who have been here for a long time say that the home has a history of being reactive, that is because what we've seen time and time again is that there will be a number of serious problems to the point where the situation there is out of control. And it's only when someone steps in, either through the state or the town, to take action against them, that they come into line and the incidences go away for a while, and then they slowly ramp back up at the point where they think no one else is watching. And that is a situation that cannot be allowed to continue. And finally, this suggestion that the home does not have the ability to prevent children from running away is not an accurate description of the regulations. And frankly, it's irresponsible and unconscionable to suggest that you can take custody of a 13 or 14-year-old child and you have no ability to prevent them from getting in a car with a stranger and being brought who knows where. The regulations make very clear that the home has the authority to use physical restraint when there is an imminent threat to the safety of the child or the public. A child who leaves the facility and gets in a car with an adult, an unknown adult, is in imminent danger. And every effort should be made to prevent that from happening. As someone mentioned earlier, these children, they have families that care for them. Those families are owed a solemn responsibility to keep their children safe. And if the home is not going to keep these children from running away and putting themselves in harm's way, it serves no purpose. Those children are there for that very reason. And so it is not taking responsibility to suggest that they cannot take appropriate actions here. It's not taking responsibility to say that EEC prevented them from providing proper notice to the town when they opened a facility that was not compliant with state building and fire codes. It is not taking responsibility when they accuse the police department of falsifying records of incidents. All of these diversions suggest that perhaps the upper management at the home is not seeing what's wrong here and not willing to take responsibility. But all that being said, you know, the authority of the Board of Health is meant to abate public nuisances, not to punish for past misdeeds. And so the evidence that you heard is that there are no longer any individuals at the facility who are infected with COVID-19. You've heard that officials from the state and staff at the facility have been working with the police department to put in place measures to prevent this situation from happening again. You've heard testimony that staff at the facility has been working with the Board of Health to properly report instances of COVID-19. And you've heard testimony from the chief that since the order has been issued, the number of instances has gone down dramatically. So, you know, with all that being said, you know, the board again has the decision to make to either leave the order in place, to vacate the order, or to modify the order. And so with that, I will turn it over to members of the board. And of course, I'm here to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Attorney Corbo. I guess in in the interest of trying to be as fair as possible and balance the, well, I'll use the word competing interest, but that may not be the best way to phrase it. But to recognize that some positive things have occurred over the last 5 to 6 weeks with the relationship between the Home for Little Wanderers and the town, and increased communication, increased cooperation, increased involvement. Those are all very positive things. Heard from the other members of the board that they felt that was positive, but there's also a concern that we don't want to see that backslide in any way. That based on the information, evidence, testimony that we heard this evening, I would like to make a motion that the Board of Health vote to vacate the cease and desist order that we issued on December 22nd, based on the evidence presented that the conditions that led to our issuance of that order are no longer in place, but that the board does have a concern that continued monitoring is an important part of maintaining the fact that those conditions no longer exist. And so we would ask that the Home for Little Wanderers, either through their legal counsel or through communication with the health director, provide, actually with the health director and the chief of police, provide an update to this board on a quarterly basis over the next 12-month period. So that would mean an update in our April, July, and October meetings of 2021 and our January meeting of 2022. It may not be necessary that you physically attend the meeting. I'd be certainly willing to accept a report through our health director based on discussions that she may have had with the relevant parties, though certainly you're always welcome to attend our meetings. But that would be my motion. So basically we would move to vacate the order, but monitor over the next year to make sure that things continue to move in a positive direction.
I'll second that motion.
Motion has been made and seconded. Is there further discussion from the board tonight? Hearing none, we'll poll the members. Carol?
Aye.
Excuse me, Mona?
Aye.
Richard?
Aye.
And myself, aye. Vote is 4-0-0 to vacate the order. If there is nothing else, we will vote to close the public hearing at this time.
I just may say, that sounds fantastic. Thank you very much. And we would be happy to communicate with this board, whether through the board or in person.
No, thank you. Thank you, sir. Appreciate that very much.
If they come up in the meantime, please don't hesitate at all to reach out to any of the members of the Home for the Wanderers over here today, or myself, through council, however you wish. You know, I've been with the Home for 15 years, and you know, you can call me day or night. You know, I'm willing to help out. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney. Then we'll vote to close the public hearing. Carol?
Aye.
Mona?
Aye.
Richard?
Aye.
And myself, aye. Public hearing is now closed. Is there any other business that the board needs to be aware of this evening?
No, there is not. Our next Board of Health meeting will be held on the 16th of February.
All right, then I'll make a motion that we adjourn. Motion is made and seconded. All in favor, Carol?
Aye.
Mona?
Aye.
Richard?
Aye.
Myself, aye. Board of Health meeting is now adjourned for February the 2nd. Thank you all very much. I know the hour is quite late or much later than normal, but appreciate your involvement and willingness to share your thoughts and concerns and so forth, and we'll move forward from here. So everyone stay safe and healthy.
Thank you.
Thank you.